You've got the usual tropes of modern Hollywood productions where, £100 teenage girls can somehow beat up £250 stuntmen with ease because, yeah, that's definitely believable. Just silly things like these two characters are walking through the ruins of a city in the latest episode that I saw, and there's still somehow magically pride flags and pride murals everywhere. You'd think after 20 years of, the apocalypse, like that stuff would all have disappeared. But no, apparently it hasn't.
Now, you are one of YouTube's most popular film and movie critics, and TV critics, I should say. And one of the biggest shows at the moment is The Last of Us. This is an HBO production based on a video game. You've been fairly critical of that show. Can you tell us why?
Well, I actually did like season one. I thought it was a pretty good approximation of the game, and I think it was a fairly mature bit of storytelling. So that was all great. But for people who've played the games, they would know where this is all heading. There's some very controversial plot points in that basically involve killing off the main character from the first season, the first game, Yeah, sure enough, they went ahead with it. It was wildly unpopular when they did it in the video game 5 years ago, and it's been just as unpopular now. So I think that decision combined with arguably some pretty bad casting decisions, and in some cases actually implementing the storylines even worse than they did in the games, it's all combined together to make a horrendously unpopular second season of this show. It's a real shame to see where it's gone.
Okay, and there was this weird thing where you put up on YouTube a critical review of one of the latest episodes, and then HBO took it down. Is that right?
That is right, yeah. They gave it a copyright claim, not a copyright strike against my channel, which has been reported by some people, but no, it wasn't as severe as that, but they did block it worldwide for pretty shady reasons. It's really just a case of abusing the copyright system because I am a pretty high-profile channel and I'd been quite critical of the show for, I think, very valid reasons. Saying that I don't think Bella Ramsey's Ellie is going to be able to hold up the show by herself from now on, that killing off Joel, the main character from season one, was a bad choice, that sort of thing. So fairly tame criticisms. But they obviously didn't like it, and so they tried to silence me by copyright claiming the entire video and blocking it worldwide, which caused quite a stir, as it turned out, because it happened while I was asleep. It happened in the middle of the night.
But they've since restored the video.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, so you could argue that it might have been because I've got a fair amount of reach and I was able to make quite a noise about it on social media. Also, a lot of other channels really helped me out on this one, actually, and I'm very appreciative of that, by making videos of their own, highlighting the hypocrisy of a company like that tries to silence legitimate criticism of their products. And so those two things combined, I think, was enough to convince them that, yes, we can't get away with this and we should probably restore the video. And so they did, to be fair.
Okay, so going back to The Last of Us itself, this TV program. Now, you talked about some of the reasons why fans haven't enjoyed the show, killing off one of the main characters. This also happened in the video game, and there has been some kind of controversy online, or at least a lot of criticism from HBO, for making the show just extremely cringe. So there's this clip of two of the main characters. They're both women, and one of them says that they're pregnant, and then the other one says that they're going to be a dad or something.
Yeah.
It's utterly bizarre, and the actor herself is now saying she's non-binary. So can you just explain some of the weird kind of cringeness around the show?
Oh, I mean, it's laden with stuff like that. You've got the usual tropes of modern Hollywood productions where, £100 teenage girls can somehow beat up £250 stuntmen with ease because, yeah, that's definitely believable. The main character has really become quite unlikable, very abrasive, very obnoxious, and so that certainly doesn't help. There's even, just silly things like these two characters are walking through the ruins of a city in the latest episode that I saw, and there's still somehow magically pride flags and pride murals everywhere. You know, you'd think after 20 years of, the apocalypse, like that stuff would all have disappeared. But no, apparently it hasn't, because they just really wanted to show that on screen. So it's just a culmination of lots of small things like that just gradually chips away at people's patience with this show. And I think a lot of people have got to the point of thinking, no, this just sucks. It completely sucks, and I'm not going to waste any more time with it. I think people who played the games obviously knew where this was heading. People who just came into it and were enjoying the TV show and enjoyed season 1 didn't know where it was heading necessarily, and so they're getting confronted with all of this stuff, and they don't like it. And by all accounts, their viewing figures are down quite significantly.
Yeah, I saw the first season and I was interested. I thought it was pretty good, but there was one point that was quite, you could see it getting a bit political, where one of the main characters, the kind of girl boss black woman who runs this sort of town, she says, yeah, we're communists. This is brilliant. And I just thought, why did you have to put that line in? That's obviously so political. So do you think the show is kind of learning from the game? Because I've never played the game, but it sounds like the game is also quite political.
Oh, it's very political, yeah. And the creator of the game, especially the second one, is an outspoken political activist for all the usual causes that you would expect. And yeah, with this, I think because it was their first season, they knew they had to make a good impression. They knew they had to win people over. And so I think there was a degree of restraint shown when it came to getting too political like that. There was definitely, you could feel it. It's almost one of those, you can feel it bubbling away just beneath the surface, just straining to get out. They really wanted to go all in on these political lectures with all the usual, like, pro-socialism, pro-LGBT, pro-women empowerment, all the usual stuff. But they held back a little bit, just enough to get people hooked, to make them enjoy the show. And then once they had it with season 2, they've kind of just unleashed it, which is exactly what happened with the game.
Okay, so moving this more broadly, not just The Last of Us, but I know that you review a lot of contemporary TV shows and movies. Do you feel that this kind of woke, inverted commas, kind of politics is still rife in most TV shows and most movies? Because some people would argue that in 2020 this was like the peak. You have BLM and so on. Is this still kind of gaining momentum?
It's not gaining momentum, absolutely, but the thing you have to factor in is the lag that's always the case with movies and TV shows and so on. So whatever movies are coming out now, they reflect the politics of maybe 3 years ago when they were first commissioned. They take a long time to actually go into effect. And so there's definitely a lag that comes from the change needing to be made, the change in culture. And wow, culture has really changed over the past 6 months or so. We've seen it like in the elections in the US, just the general rejection of all of these movies that try to push this stuff. But it takes time for Hollywood to reflect that in the products that they make, because some stuff is just too far down the pipeline. But it's, from what I've been told and from what I've heard from people in the industry, most of the people higher up at these big studios are very aware of the problem now. And they're very aware that this isn't working. People aren't buying this anymore. We need to pivot away from this. And so that's what they are doing, but they're in the process of that transition at the moment. So you'll probably see still some shows and some movies that push this stuff, but it does seem to be getting less, and we are seeing more of these reshoots, that happen on movies that mysteriously have happened in the past few months, where inevitably they're trying to soften a lot of that stuff. They're trying to remove as much of it as they can. So I think you're seeing a generalized decline in it, but there will still be a few examples over the next year or two.
Do you think this is happening because this is basically hitting the bottom line? Now, you said that The Last of Us, the viewership is declining, but also, something like Snow White, I think that bombed at the box office partly because, or maybe mostly because of the politics. And I think the leading actor on that, or actress, she was very kind of outspoken, almost like criticizing Snow White as an institution itself, which just seems like a bizarre decision. So is this all about basically money and profit for the movie industry?
I mean, ultimately, yes, because they are going to follow the money, and activism will only get you so far. Like when it actually results in you having to lay people off and close down studios, that's when practicality has to take over. And ultimately, the people at the highest levels of most studios within Hollywood, they are not necessarily activists. They are money men. They will follow the things that they think will make them the most profit. And I think up until relatively recently, it was still considered that this highly progressive political pandering was profitable. They would look at things like social media, especially Twitter, before Elon Musk bought it over, and it was just a giant echo chamber. So, of course, they would think, well, that's the prevailing opinion of people. That's the prevailing culture. Of course, we have to reflect that in what we do. Now they've learned, obviously, since then, that is not the case. And things are changing quite rapidly. So, yeah, there's no incentive for them to carry on doing this when it does not make them money. And yeah, Snow White is just one example of many.
Is there any kind of TV show or movie that you've seen recently that you thought, wow, that's got no wokery, there's no kind of, progressive politics there, and it really kind of worked? Because I know that some conservative studios like the Daily Wire, they make these so-called conservative films, and you just think, okay, not great, kind of cringe, the comedy doesn't work. I think actually some of the Matt Walsh documentaries have been fantastic, but their kind of feature films less so.
Exactly, yeah, because they're trying to play catch up with Hollywood that's been established for 100 years at this point, and so inevitably, yeah, it's going to take a long time for them to get the resources and to get the experience to be making really good, high quality movies. As you say, some of their documentary stuff is kind of interesting and so on. But yeah, as far as the rest of it goes, it's a tough one. I wouldn't necessarily expect companies like the Daily Wire to be upsetting the Hollywood paradigm anytime soon. They just don't have enough resources right now to be able to compete with them.
I guess there are some movies that you just think, like I've seen, for example, Top Gun Maverick. That didn't seem to me to be progressive at all. It just seemed very neutral, was very successful. So there are obviously some examples, recent examples, I guess, where movie studios or film studios have decided we're not going to take this progressive line and we're just going to make neutral films like they used to.
There's Paramount Plus is quite interesting with this kind of thing because Taylor Sheridan, who's like one of their big talents there, he's produced things like Yellowstone, Tulsa King. They've got a new one out now called Mobland, which I've just started watching. It's a great cast. It's got Tom Hardy, Pierce Brosnan, Helen Mirren in it. That is a good example of a show that doesn't seem to have any real political agenda. It's just telling a pretty interesting sort of gangster story, and it's excellent, as a result. So it is happening. It can happen, and hopefully it's going to happen more and more as these things take off and do well.
Okay, I want to finish by talking briefly about Disney. So Disney, obviously huge, owns major IP, including Star Wars and lots of other things. On Star Wars, it was kind of an anniversary recently, and they re-released the Revenge of the Sith. But Disney have been criticized for, again, adding progressive politics into Star Wars. Do you think they've basically ruined that franchise now? Because so much of the recent content they put out has just, frankly, not been very good.
They absolutely have, yeah. And the sad thing is that good content that does come out, the occasional piece of good content, then gets completely buried because the brand isn't strong enough to support it now. Like Andor is a good example of that. That is a genuinely excellent show. Very sophisticated, very intelligent, very mature, a very interesting take on Star Wars. But it's barely attracting an audience, and it costs $600 million to make 2 seasons of it. And that's the sad thing. When the brand is damaged, it can't support things like this, which are a little bit different, a little bit more experimental. And so Star Wars now is trapped in a no-win situation where the only thing that attracts attention now is these shows where they just wheel out some old actor to play a character again, like Obi-Wan Kenobi or something like that people remember and recognize. But it's just playing on nostalgia. It's not capable of creating anything new that people are going to be interested in. So yeah, huge amount of brand damage that they've done to franchises like that. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is arguably in the same position, where even movies that are relatively fun, like Thunderbolts, aren't doing particularly well. This used to be a franchise that would routinely make billion-dollar movies. It's just not happening anymore.
It does seem they've oversaturated the market, though, because they just released so many of these, what they thought, I guess, were cash cows, and then eventually you're kind of reducing the quality or the kind of, I don't know, special aura around it. I'm not being very articulate here. So maybe producing too much of this can kind of, it makes people tired of the franchise.
I think particularly with Marvel, it went from being an event to being homework. Particularly when they started releasing all the TV shows on Disney Plus, because then it's a huge amount of additional content that people are expected to catch up on, and it is kind of necessary because it's all tied into a big ongoing storyline. And if you miss something, well, you're not going to know what the next movie's all about, and so on. And yeah, as you say, it's oversaturation of the market and flooding it ultimately with pretty low quality garbage, sadly. And so they're suffering the results now. Like, people are not tuning in because they're just not passionate about it anymore. It doesn't feel like a big cultural event that people can get excited about.
Now, your channel has a big reach in the US, I believe. I mean, I know a lot of Americans who, I've spoken to them. I'm going to interview you, and they're like, "Whoa, can't believe it." And you're a bit of a British export, I think, around the world. One of those major kind of British franchises that is still very popular around the world is James Bond. And we've been talking a lot about that word culture, not culture, we've been talking a lot about that word content. And that word content led to a big kind of falling out between Amazon and the original kind of owners of that IP. I think the person who was in charge of the kind of James Bond franchise, she was very upset when an Amazon executive used that kind of word content. Basically, Amazon viewing it as a financial kind of cash cow, and she views it more as, a beloved institution. Are you worried about the future of James Bond?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone should be if they're a fan of James Bond. It's in the hands now of people who, it's not even British, a British company or a British studio that's got control over it now. It's Amazon. And, Bond is one of the most quintessentially British characters imaginable. And yeah, this idea that you can somehow turn him into a Bond cinematic universe where you've got spin-offs that are about Moneypenny and Q and God knows what else. It's not what the Bond franchise is supposed to be about. Again, a Bond movie coming out is supposed to be an event. It's supposed to be something that happens once every few years, and it's a big, exciting event that everyone's excited to tune in for. Not that we want TV shows and all this endless expansion of it. So yeah, I mean, Bond has already been in trouble for a number of years anyway, as far as I'm concerned. I think Daniel Craig's run as Bond was probably the most destructive force upon this franchise that you could imagine. It turned Bond from like the quintessential masculine archetype to a bit of a pathetic wimp. And it's tough to come back from that now. Because once you've set that precedent, the next Bond is going to be compared to it, and he's going to be expected to follow that line.
What would be your advice to the Bond creators? Because some fans have said, "Oh, look, why don't you take Bond back to the 60s,
Yes.
back to the Cold War? Then you would avoid sort of some of the political stuff of the contemporary age."
Yep, hire Henry Cavill to play Bond. Set it in the 1960s during the height of the Cold War, like reduce all the reliance on technology and so on, and have him be a drinking, smoking womanizer again. That's what he's supposed to be. He doesn't need to reflect contemporary values. I don't want him to be emotionally accessible, and I don't care about his personal life or what he likes to sit down and cry about of an evening. He's not supposed to be that. He is an archetype, not a specific character that we're supposed to get to know. So that would be my advice to them.
Okay, last question. I want to ask again, bring this back to Britain. This is GB News. What do you make of kind of British TV shows, British movies? Do you think we're still kind of punching above our weight across the world, or is British culture kind of on the decline?
I mean, if you're talking about things like British institutions, like things like Doctor Who, for example, used to be a huge deal in America. They really embraced it. Not anymore. It's garbage. So the problem is as well, a lot of big American productions now use our film facilities over here because we give them great tax breaks, which is nice for everyone involved. But we're potentially going to see the end of that with the new tariffs that are going to come in. That's going to take a lot of that work back to America, which could potentially be devastating for the British film industry. So I don't know ultimately where it's going to go. I hope it does some kind of has some path to recovery for this, so that we start making more of our own homegrown movies and so on. We'll have to wait and see on that one.